Okay. Does it show recording to you guys? Oh, yep, it is. Okay. Okay, guys, we're at the Faith and Politics class here. Today is Sunday, May 17th, 2020. We are on part 2 of media bias. Okay, so looking at this chart, multiple perspectives, we have to, as bridge builders and uniters, see the bigger picture here of what truth is. So truth, just a quick reminder for all of us, is extremely important for us as Christians. But it's not just Christians, it's also Americans, right? We've heard this phrase, truth, justice, and the American way, many, many times. It's up there with one of our core values as Americans. The Greek word for truth is aletheia. Don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but we actually had a group when I was growing up in high school that was called aletheia. That was our committed to the truth. Gets quite a mention in the New Testament. You see it's mentioned more than righteousness, peace, and even gospel, which I thought was interesting. But it is surpassed by a few other key things like faith, law, and love. Interesting law, which shows that truth and rule of law kind of go together here. They're both mentioned highly frequently. Just looking at a few verses. I mean, there's 109 verses where the Greek word is mentioned, but a few things I thought of is, hey, Jesus himself was thought to be the truth, and this was said from others, not just his own claim, where he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." If we want to worship God properly, we must worship in spirit and in truth, in John 4:24 here, and we can trust the Holy Spirit to help us with discernment, to be guided in all truth, as in the promise of John 16:13 here. And in our last module, right, phase 2, we read that book, Love Your Enemies, by Dr. Brooks, and these go hand in hand. 1 Corinthians 13:6 says, "Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth." It is evil to hate our enemies, right? But we want to rid ourselves of evil and move on and rejoice with the truth. So I put this page in on truth because I think it is very important when we move into phase 3. And as each of us pair up, maybe we're paired up as husband and wife or whatever, but we're leading a group of 6 to 8 other people, we have to help them agree on the sources of truth. I think it's probably a safe bet that since we're starting with Elmbrook in phase 3, we're not in the community yet, that most people will agree that the Bible is the source of truth. And the Bible is clearly the source of absolute truth. It is where we look to for things that are true for all people in all places at all times. But there's a lot of extra biblical truth out there too. How do you ride a car or drive a car, or how do you build a house, or how do you throw a button on? And that's a different kind of truth, right? The contemporary truth that we have to find other sources to, say, well, what is the way that things work? And it's important because in each of our groups, as we work through the issues in phase 1, whether it be immigration or healthcare, education, poverty, whatever, if our group of 6 to 10 people don't have common ground and you're looking from multiple sets of facts and multiple sets of interpretations, our chance of success for helping them converge on what a potential step forward in would be in, say, immigration or whatever else, is going to be very small. Let me just kind of pause there and see if any commentary or questions on this.
Yeah, that comes to mind is when Jesus was in front of Pontius Pilate, and it was Pontius Pilate said, "What is truth?" Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sort of goes in line with this whole thread.
Yep, it's important that we find a way to get there. Not that any of us will ever have perfect truth. We don't want to let perfection get in the way of good. Because even back in that last page, seeing that weird shape, none of us can even describe in English what the name of that weird shape is, even though there is a term for that shape. We just don't know it.
Right. That would be my concern, is just knowing what is the truth. I mean, we know with confidence as Christians, the Bible is a source of truth. And then we talk about all the other sources of truth, and just the helping people understand that it is a source of truth, because everybody seems to have their own truths.
Right. And I think the Bible is a source of absolute, but all the other ones, they're going to be they're not absolute. They're going to be directionally correct. And that's what we have to help people if we're going to together is, what is the right direction, guys? I know that my car will turn on and I know how to drive it, but I can't explain the truth of the mechanics of internal combustion engine or even the physics behind how octane explodes. I do know that it works, and that's enough for me to move the car forward, right? That's
Right.
kind of like what we're here. Okay, so this is the media bias chart that we briefly touched on last time. And you can kind of see a whole bunch of different sources here, over 100 different sources, certainly not all of them, but major ones. We're going to take the rest of this time here to kind of just talk through how this chart is put together and why it's, I think, worth a useful tool for us to consider. It's not the only tool out there. There's a few more. I'll reference that in the back that are like this, but I think this is one of the best ones that we can find some value in. Okay, so there are two dimensions of this tool, which is what distinguishes it from other tools in terms of tools that rate the news. So starting with the y-axis, this is what is known as the reliability axis. Other synonyms might be how credible or how trustworthy is this source or is this article or is this program. So the way they've set it up is that this is based on a 64-point scale. So 0 is completely misleading, total propaganda, whereas 64 is you are hearing from a first-person source exactly what is going on. So if Kevin tells us, he says, my name is Kevin Kane and I work at Oracle, you would be right up here because you are the person talking about yourself. What Adfontes Media on the media bias chart, they look at 4 different elements to try to determine reliability or trustworthiness. Those elements are veracity, expression, fairness, and then look at the headline and graphic. In this scale, the vertical one is different from the horizontal one, which you'll see in a minute. This is a sentence by sentence assessment. So you can, it brings a level of objectivity into something that is fairly difficult for most people to assess and tries to provide some scale and means to do that. So let's look at kind of 3 of the 4 things. I didn't put headline or graphic here because that's more pictorial, but at least on the headline graphic, you can kind of see, is it accurate and relevant to the discussion? Is it sensationalized? Those are some of the things that come out in the headline. But the other 3 things have some definitions behind it. So veracity talks about, is something true and complete versus, hey, it's mostly true, but they left out some stuff. There is some true and now some falsehoods, all the way to, completely false. And one thing to note about here is that one of the things that Adfontes does is they, when it's needed, refer to other multiple fact checkers like PolitiFact, like Snopes, like factcheck.org, etc., just to make sure that they've got a well-rounded view on what might be true and what might not be. Expression is related to how something is presented. So it's not so much the linguistic piece, like using adjectives, which is more on the x-axis, which we'll talk about in a minute, but more on, am I stating something, or am I coming across, or am I leading you to think that what I am saying in my article, is it fact or not? Because many times sources do not, they try to say something is fact when it's not really supported by fact, right? So there is a kind of hierarchy of first-person fact, like using the illustration of Kevin Kane working at Oracle. There could be factor analysis, like Rich Eng now reporting on Kevin Kane, saying, hey, I think Kevin Kane has a great job at Oracle. The great job is an analysis there. The analysis is in the case of this example, well supported by fact and is reasonable. And then maybe there's an opinion. Oh, Kevin Kane, in Rich Eng's mind, he works at Oracle, but Oracle is led by Larry Ellison, who is a crazy, greedy, capitalistic fellow, right? I'm making something up. Now I've injected opinion in there. And then I would say, oh, Kevin Kane works at Oracle, but it is a decrepit company because Larry Kane was abducted by aliens and is going to sell out the planet to, some intergalactic force, right? Be, yeah, obviously extreme examples, but that's an idea of expression on in a sentence. And then the whole fairness idea is really only two things. It's either fair or unfair, and we'll dive into an example to understand what this is. But some elements that allow one to see whether something is unfair is whether a comment is irrelevant or not. Like when we were talking about Larry Ellison and being of aliens, that was completely irrelevant to the fact that Kevin Kane works there. Is it untimely? Ad hominem are attacks to a person. So instead of attacking the argument, you would just say, oh, Rich Eng, he doesn't know anything that he's talking about, instead of refuting the fact that Larry Ellison wasn't from aliens. Using emotionally charged words. These are usually adjectives or adverbs like disgusting, stupid, crazy, but they could be even how a sentence is structured. But usually being aware of the adjectives is important. Misconstrued context. If you leave out certain things, if you're talking, the article is one thing, but you bring up something else, that's bad. And then, you follow my example on the Larry Ellison alien thing is clearly being false, a false premise. Questions on the vertical axis here?
Well, just a more step back. So Advantas, so my theory is whenever I look at is follow the money, right? So how are they funded and how do they, I mean, this is, if this is the way they approach it, it's fantastic, but there's also always something underlying, right? So do you guys happen to know how they're funded or?
So they have, I think, something on their website on how they're funded. They only got like a $32,000 grant to do this initial work, so it's not like a.
Oh, it's not an ongoing thing.
Well, she's trying to make it ongoing. I'll talk more about it later. And then in the back, I also include some links to journalistic standards, of which independence and freedom from financial things is very important. So you go into that today, but that's why separating, giving the editor of a reputable publication the ability to do things and speak truth, even if it means advertising dollars, is important. Right? Otherwise, you are perfectly right, Kevin. It could be corrupted by whoever's funding whatever.
Or not necessarily even corrupted, but just
Slanted.
Influenced, right?
Sure.
So.
That is a great point that you bring up here.
Yep, I think that's why I appreciate that there is like a cross-partisan effort. And so, you each,
Yeah, we'll
the left,
explain that.
yeah, okay, you can talk about that.
Yep. So it is multi-person assessment. Okay, we'll get into that 2 pages from now. Because that was the vertical axis. Dawn, any questions from you on this?
No.
All right.
I would like to know if you'll send these slides out to us.
Absolutely. I will put
Okay.
it on the Slack afterwards here.
Then I don't have to keep trying to I like to take notes, so this will be good.
You guys can have it. Feel free to ask questions. This is a lot of stuff that we tried to condense. I mean, I was impressed that you read that white paper. It's pretty dry.
I didn't read it but I read through it. Yeah, it was pretty impressive.
I summarized it in 1 page. So
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
we'll get to that. Okay, so the y-axis is the reliability axis, and then the horizontal axis is the political bias axis. So this scale is rated from a -42 to a 42, and it's most extreme left to most extreme right. 2 elements here are really what Ad Fontes looks at is how is the article or program itself politically positioned? How do they characterize that position? And then one other thing is that this scale is kind of a relative scale because you have to kind of do a comparison. It's almost meaningless to have a scale on political bias without knowing another point. So if we went to another country like India and we made one statement about, say, what is the value of a unborn child's life here, without being Indian, we would have no context of the answers that come back because maybe it's pretty common there that they do infanticide and they don't care. And so that becomes more neutral as opposed to being, hey, most of us evangelicals, we strongly defend, abortion, pro-life from abortion here, right? So this comparison is important. The other thing to note is that it needs to be contemporaneous, meaning it's hard to compare what we're doing today versus what happened 50 years ago. So the idea of civil rights was a radical thing on the left, letting, or even go back even further, women's suffrage, right? Letting women vote back before 1919 would have been an extreme leftist position. But now it is not. It is just normal that we assume that women should vote, right? So that's kind of something to be careful of, making sure we do the comparisons in the same time frame. Unlike the y-axis, we kind of rate these things as a whole, so you have to get the tenor of what's happening. And the way the scale is calibrated is really with the hyperpartisan left bucket and the hyperpartisan right bucket. These are determined by what is the GOP platform say and what does the Democratic platform say on a variety of issues, which would be kind of these issues where we can more readily discern the political extremes. There is also some calibration where you can check out by going to this site, govtrack.us, which ranks every senator and every representative, from 1 to 100 or 1 to 435 of where they stand ideologically on the left-right spectrum. So, if you pick, say, pick something like defense, which is a value that the right has typically, the one who is the most extreme senator on this position would kind of be the boundary condition for partisan right, and then ditto on the left. The tails of most extreme right and most extreme left fall outside the bounds of our farthest right or farthest left politician. So if you look at, say, a Nazi is generally considered extremely far right, even though there's a range with them there. But they would be outside of the hyperpartisan right because there is no senator today that runs on a platform of I want Nazism to take over the U.S. again. So that's kind of how you quantify it. So even though it's on a scale of 42 to minus 42, probably these 7 buckets are good enough for most people to just see where things generally form. We talked a little bit about the different political positions. We can probably tell most of these where you're from, like gun control. You're a big Second Amendment person, you're going to want open carry. You're going to want to own a bazooka and a tank. If you're on the right, the far right. If you're on the left, you don't want any guns, you don't want any bullets, you probably want to take away our knives, blah, 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 and that would be like all the way on the left. So these are examples of things where it's relatively easy to see. Okay, the second dimension on how the horizontal axis is set up beyond the political position is how the article or the program characterizes things. So if you notice a lot, sometimes there are these 2 terms that are used, say on the abortion position, of pro-life versus anti-abortion. So just throwing it out, how do you guys like to be referred to regarding your stance on abortion? Just a question to Kevin and Dawn.
No.
Pro-life.
Yeah.
Pro-life. I also like to be known as pro-life. But in many times in the media, what are we referred to as?
Right.
We are referred to as anti-abortionists, right? So that shows that we are against something, even though we want to be for something. So that's, a little way to characterize a story, which kind of will tell you whether you lean a little bit more right or you lean a little bit more left here in just the word choice.
Well, yeah. Even on the flip side of that, pro-choice versus abortion, right? Pro-abortion versus pro-choice.
You got it, right? Gun control versus gun safety, confiscation, whatever. Yeah, another example would be like how we refer to immigrants, illegal alien versus undocumented immigrant. Those are two terms that kind of refer to the same thing, but they kind of give away a political characterization, at least in the US. Right? The funny thing is for us, who, we kind of tend to lean right a little bit, is the term alien, even though it's used and is characteristic of the political right, when we look at the Bible, as we learned in David's book, the term alien was used all the time in a positive sense of, how we were supposed to take care of them. Anyways,
Right.
interesting. A couple other characterizations, adjectives I talked about before on the other page, but sometimes the adjectives by themselves aren't necessarily bad, but if you put them next to a politician, a policy, or a party, then it indicates political bias, right? So ugly or stupid. It's a stupid idea to jump off a building without any parachute. And so that's probably not a very political statement. But once you say something like Hillary Clinton is stupid or Donald Trump is stupid, now you've started to characterize things as either left or right. And clearly, I think we're going to have to be on our toes on this one when we do our table groups. I mean, there's a ton of words that we call each other on both the left and the right. We got to make sure that we're in control of that and we tone it down. We actually have a whole section later on making sure that it's not, doesn't devolve into a yelling match of deplorables versus snowflakes and leftists versus mainstream media idiots or whatever. We got to watch that. And then last thing here is the invocation of terms of what we call bogeymen. So bogeymen are these mysterious phrases that never have a name associated with it or anything specific. It's just meant deliberately to invoke fear or anger or some negative emotion. So when terms like the Muslim Brotherhood that is used by the right, or the 1% used by the left, or deep state on the right, big pharma on the left, who is the 1%? We don't have a name. There's probably just by definition at Elmbrook, if we've got a few thousand people at Elmbrook, there's hundreds of them that are in the 1%. Is that who they are? Who is big pharma? Are we talking, $1 billion companies only? What about those that are half a billion? We don't know, right? Mainstream media is another one that gets you bandied about a lot. That's another bogeyman. Okay, so that's kind of a quick overview on the horizontal scale. Any questions on that?
No?
Yeah. Okay. So here's the one pager that summarized that whole white paper that you read, Dawn. In a nutshell, this is how Qantas does things. They took 20 analysts and trained them in kind of the vertical and the horizontal axis that we just went over, in much greater detail though. These analysts are all split across left to right lines. They have 6 Democrats, 8 independents, and 6 Republicans to make sure that it's pretty balanced. They looked at the same sources for 3 months earlier this year, and each article had at least 3, could be more, of the analyst rate, so it was balanced. And it was literally almost 2,000 articles and TV programs. So it's actually, the specific numbers are 1,818 articles and 98 TV programs were rated for the version 5 of the chart. And interesting is that every analyst was assigned to read articles from all sources. So it wasn't that the Democrats only read the ones from the left and vice versa for the Republicans. They all had to read everything. So, and then they would rate them on the X and Y axis. They continue to rate articles every week. Here's a link to the articles of the week. You can see that there. And that's the methodology. So fairly robust in my opinion. I think good enough to make some comparative calls in terms of what the media is. And I was impressed with what they've done with a relatively small amount of money so far. All right, so we are at the top of the hour. And what we had wanted to do was to work through an example of bias from the left, an example of bias from the right, and walk through the analysis of how they went through this. So let me just ask you guys, do you guys need to drop off now? I know you have class at 10:30. You want to go a little bit longer and look at one of these?
Sure. Yeah.
We can.
Okay, so we'll keep going. All right, so I put in the link of the Slack. If you guys are on the Slack, you can see what this article is right here, the one from Pink News, which is a left-leaning source. So if you want to just read through that quickly on your own, that will be helpful. And then we'll go to this page. Let me just stop sharing briefly.
The Bill O'Reilly.
Yeah, the article about Bill O'Reilly. It's to read that one. And just take a quick scan of it. You don't have to read it fully. It's not too long. But what I do want to walk through is how Ed Fontes went through the analysis here. So just scan it quickly and let us know once you're done.
Oh, gosh.
Probably becoming pretty obvious, the bias, huh?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, as you guys are wrapping it up, let me share the screen then to display the analysis from Ed Fontes. Let me know when you can see the screen.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so this is an article from Pink News, which is a UK publication that defends gay people, basically. So fairly left, just from its mission statement. It was written on October 24th, 2017, 706 words.
Right.
And Ed Fontes characterized it here. They said it is not that reliable. It's selective or incomplete story, unfair persuasion on the vertical axis. And on the x-axis, they labeled it as hyperpartisan liberal. So clearly not one of the more reliable sources. But here's why. So first thing they did was they analyzed the title. Here's the title: Bill O'Reilly caught in $32 million Fox News gay adult film scandal. And they said the title has issues. The first one is that it misled on the underlying facts. But the fact is there is no current known scandal involving Fox News and gay adult films. What this really was about a sexual harassment lawsuit in which Bill O'Reilly allegedly sent a woman gay porn. So that's why the title is misleading, because they think, oh, there is a relationship between Fox and gay adult films industry, which is not right. So that's continued on in the content of the article. It says, hey, this is really about sexual harassment. Only one mention of gay porn, and that was not an industry, but Bill O'Reilly sending it. And that resulted in his departure from Fox and the settlement. All right, so another thing that they pointed out is misleading content is sensationalist or clickbait. So if you go to the actual article, you probably won't see this anymore because they removed this piece and they only showed the picture of Bill Riley. This piece is just it's a stock footage of a gay couple doing something meant to invoke some sort of disgust with Bill O'Reilly. Again, it has nothing to do with the full nature of the story, and so that's why that graphic itself is misleading. They have since changed the graphic on the page to just be of Bill O'Reilly. Let's see. A couple of other elements. So we talked about the inaccuracy regarding the underlying fact. There was nothing documented in the public court filings about a gay porn industry versus a class action lawsuit against Fox. That was not there. The article itself quoted the New York Times that it was about sexual harassment, not about gay porn. And here's an example of an adjective. So they specifically refer to Bill O'Reilly as anti-gay. So that is clearly a left term for, which is meant to invoke a certain emotion.
That's a bogeyman.
Yeah, no, it's not quite a bogeyman. So the bogeyman would be,
No.
a bogeyman refers to is not so much an adjective. It would be like a proper noun. So the bogeymen are like, let's say,
I guess.
a group that was dedicated to killing all gay people. Nothing comes to mind, but if there was, that would be like invoking a bogeyman. This is just anti-gay as an adjective. Anti-gay or homophobe.
Homophobe, yeah.
Homophobe would be another use of the word, right? Racist is often used. That's another adjective. But because Pink is targeted to a pro-LGBT audience, they kind of know that term is going to get their audience riled up. And in the sense that they're going to say, oh, O'Reilly, even if I haven't heard much about him, he's a despicable guy. And that's what it's meant to invoke. Let's see, other ideas. Okay, so in the article itself, the idea that just because you are anti-gay, using that word, or even if you said something like pro-traditional marriage, you imply that because of this, you are therefore a bad person, which is not necessarily true, because you should tie the bad person to the fact that he was basically sexually harassing this other woman at Fox News. So it's making the wrong promotion of the idea. Okay, so you get a sense of some of the bad elements in that article. So now what Ad Fontes does is they do some quantitative analysis. They look at, okay, there were 706 total words, 28 sentences, went through sentence by sentence. There were no inaccurate sentences. There were no misleading sentences on the facts itself. But when you start looking at fact, analysis, and opinion, they got some of the analysis and the opinions wrong. So it was only 86% fact versus some of the quoted statements. There were 7% of the sentences had some problems with adjectives there. There was one analytic statement and one opinion statement that probably weren't quite justified. And there wasn't anything that was just blatantly made up, like Bill O'Reilly was an alien in disguise, nothing like that. And then they looked at kind of that third element, if you remember, on the bottom right of that one page, fair versus unfair. They said this was only 71% fair. So they said in sentences 1 through 7 and 9 through 20, of the 28 sentences, they rated as fair because they were factual, relevant, and timely. But 8 of the sentences, or almost 30%, were unfair because they were untimely, they weren't related to the title, and they were used for idea promotion. And the idea that just because you're quote unquote anti-gay, you are a bad person is not a correct if-then statement. So this is why they rated the overall article with a quality score, so the vertical axis, reliability, as a selective story, unfair influence, because of 29% of the sentences were used for an unfair purpose. And they kind of have this scale. Look, if you've got more than 10% unfair, you're going to be ranked pretty low here. So it's a relatively high bar. Even 90% fair is going to put you on the reliability score of pretty low. And then the title and graphics were very, they said extremely misleading. So they put it at hyperpartisan. And it was really trying to, instead of reporting on the story, it was really trying to proliferate a pro-LGBT message. Even though the article was about sexual harassment, not about an attack on gay people. So that was the ranking. And again, you can see where it stood there. And get a drink in. Any questions on how they went about doing this?
No, it
Seems logical.
pretty thorough.
Yep. And so they did the same for a right-leaning source. We won't go over that, but I think it was an article from Daily Caller, Daily Wire, something like
You
that.
can just maybe summarize the right one.
Yeah, okay, so we'll show you the right one because it was,
I thought it
let me
was-
stop sharing here real quick.
I think it's worth at least just explaining a little bit.
Trump was right.
Yep. So,
You know immediately where that's coming from.
yeah. So let me just share.
Well,
the
I mean, I
screen.
just say that because generally I do like, Ben Shapiro, sometimes he's very frank, bold, how he says things, but I generally think that he tries to be trustworthy. So this is why
Yeah.
I
Yes.
was disappointed.
Yeah, we won't go over all of this. It's a very short article. It's pretty much and ends right here. So it's like three page downs. But essentially what this article did, and it's in the Daily Wire, which is generally a right-leaning source. If you remember the situation back in 2017, there was an issue with a Gold Star widow that, was controversial. It was about how Trump disregarded that person and, talked badly and made her feel bad. But her husband, who had died, was a guy by the name of Sergeant Johnson. It turns out there are multiple Gold Star widows, and this article was about another Private Johnson, I think, another rank. So deliberately trying to counter a narrative that was on many different sources about how President Trump had disrespected this one Gold Star military person by the name of Johnson. But it was really talking to another Johnson that was in such a positive light. So that's why this one was rated relatively.
See, most who would read that probably just wouldn't even get that.
Exactly.
That's
And so
exactly
the people
right.
writing this, probably knew that based on the timing, right? So timiness is important
Yeah.
to that news cycle. And because Johnson is such a common name, right? You don't get the
Right.
Anyway, I won't go over it, but you can see in the same article from Adfontes, you can see how they analyze that right-leaning piece of media. All right, let me go back and
Question for you, because this is really, I love this. So how do they determine which articles they review? And that's what you said, we could go and see the weekly articles they review. So every week they do another set of articles.
Absolutely, yep. So I'm refreshing here, and I'll put that link in the Slack. But here's the 6 articles that they reviewed this week or last week, and you can see how they rated them. And then, if you want, you can always kind of rate yourself and see. And then you begin to get this comparison.
Nice.
Or how they choose, like, is it randomized?
They choose it all about the same story.
Right, but how do they choose the story?
Yeah.
I don't know how they choose the story other than something that was well covered by left, right,
Okay.
and center. I don't know how,
Okay.
but it's always about the same topic so that you can
Right.
see what it's about. So, let's go back to the. Okay, so if you want to read the analysis and the right source, here's the link here, and again that'll be in the slide. So look, the bottom line that we'll have to get to, and we got to make sure we're all on the same page first, is here are what are the general trustworthy sources just based on the analysis from Ad Fontes. And this has been over time. We want to remind people that trustworthy does not mean perfect. There will be times, probably many times, just given how so much news is out there, that there will be inaccuracies. There will be things that are wrong. But what has to be in place is solid processes that monitor, correct, and retract quickly, relative to those that are less reliable. So that's what trustworthy means. And I think we'll have to make sure, particularly at Elmbrook, that there's a lot of times people want to bring up something that says, oh, well, this is wrong. Well, 1 out of 1,000 being wrong is much better than 100 out of 1,000 being wrong relative to another source. That's what trustworthy means here. It doesn't mean perfect. Mm-hmm. So when they have done their analysis over those 2,000 articles and programs, these are the items that kind of come up in the middle. And I just kind of list them out here to say, in general, we should point people to these sources as relatively trustworthy in general. Again, you still have to read every article, and probably what we should be referring to. So let me just pause, have you guys take a look at that, and then comment. It's okay if you agree or disagree, but we'd love to just kind of talk a little bit about this, because we have to get our table groups to this point eventually as well.
So is this is strictly like written articles, right? Not the mainstream sort of news like ABC, CBS, the news shows, right?
What's this?
So it was both articles and TV programs.
It is TV programs.
Oh, it is more article. It is both articles and TV programs, but there were 1,818 articles that they use and 98 TV programs.
Okay.
So it's more, I would say, on the written word.
So what, to me, when I look at this, what's interesting is what is left off. You leave off Fox News and CNN.
And MSNBC.
And MSNBC. And that kind of like tells you
those are not,
it's not worth watching cable news. Like those three.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but even the CBS, NBC, they'll slant, right, coverage. And I mean, Chuck Todd just got in trouble last week for editing video and to fit his position or whatever. But
yeah, that is an excellent point. But the other thing is that he did retract that. He did say, he actually said he was wrong. So that was that's a characteristic of good journalistic integrity and practices, which are more here than we would see, say, at Fox or MSNBC.
Right. Well, unless no one calls him out on it, right?
Yeah, and that's another thing, is that these sources will tend to call each other out more if they catch an error. Whereas if you go to like the far left and the far right, they won't call each other out so much. But you can bet if New York Times got something wrong and Washington Post knew about it, they'll call them out. Ditto with Wall Street Journal. So they kind of, as an ecosystem, will monitor each other more so than the extremes. And then to your point, Kevin, on TV, it went beyond the scope of what we covered today, but local news and TV. So newspapers tend to be pretty reliable, particularly around our more local issues. It's really hard to politicize, Miss Baker's pothole needs to be refixed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why he only likes to watch the local news at night.
I quit watching national news, Fox, NBC. It's just I can't do it. It's just.
Yeah. We have tried to watch some. We don't get cable, so we have to go to Lena's Brothers and watch it. But as someone who doesn't consume a lot of the extremes, but access it periodically on the web, it's very easy for me to see the start.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I just don't do it.
Do you think it's always been that way, or do you think I mean, if you think about Walter Cronkite, and he was the most trusted guy in America, but he was a big lefty, right? I mean, so do you think it was just not as out there that was put out there where his personal preference was, or do you think he was actually reporting the news from his bias?
So every person has some bias, right? As part of the journalistic standards, and we'll just go to this last page here. You really try to be as unbiased, right? We avoid the things that were talked about on the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. We avoid words. You would not try to use words like stupid or crazy or things like that. But still, everybody has a bias. That's why it's good to have these news rating services like Ad Fontes or like All Sides or like Media Bias Check that kind of just rates them. I mean, it's you must have read my mind. I mean, this is the latest survey that I found from Morning Consult about who America trusts and who they don't. So this is all Americans now. It's actually very interesting when you split it between those who identify as Democrat versus those who identify as right. It's very different. But in general, amongst all Americans, Lester Holt is NBC, and he's the most trusted one in America. Anderson Cooper comes up as most trusted. But you have some Fox News people, right? So you got Harris Faulkner, and I certainly respect Chris Wallace. He's I think, goes and really tries hard to be independent here. So 2 Fox News anchors. You have, some of the talk show hosts like Sean Hannity is one of the most untrusted. Well, he's the number 1 least trusted in the country, and he's Fox. And then on the left, you have Rachel Maddow as another one of the least trusted. And she's from MSNBC. Funny thing is that Anderson Cooper is one of the least trusted here, and then the second most trusted here. So it's really the huge dichotomy between the right and the left in terms of media sources. The only other comment I'll make here, and then we'll wrap it up, is so these are all like journalists and publications, right? That these sources rate, but there are a whole bunch of think tanks too that we should probably prepare another paper on if people do research on the web, because then you got to be really careful of when I see the Cato Institute, where are they coming from? If I see Economic Policy Institute, what is that coming from? The Tax Freedom Group, right? So a whole list of think tanks also have bias that they also engage in some of these same practices of not telling the full story, not providing proper context, using improper adjectives, etc. And that's beyond the scope here, but just something to be aware about. So finally, last comment here is, I read this book and I found it profound, but it's kind of a very hard read because it's kind of like a research paper. It's written by these PhDs about the American media ecosystem. And it has been, again, Kevin, you're right on. There's been a shift over the last 30, 40 years so of how things have begun to change. It's a fascinating read. If you have the time and can stomach it, it'll go into just how our media system is the way it is today. And I think you'll be shocked by some of the things that it describes.
Interesting.
All right, that is all we had today. Last topic is, here's an upcoming view of what we think might be good items for us to cover as part of our training while we're in this coronavirus waiting phase. We'll send this out and feel free to comment. Totally flexible because we can do whatever we want. But I think this is a good start at identifying some potential class training topics.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any final questions or comments here?
So we see ourselves doing something like the exercise that we just went through, where we kind of talk about Admonis, and then we show the 2 different articles and how they were rated. I think that builds, for me personally, that just builds credibility to the bias chart.
Yeah, that could be an exercise, right? We can structure exactly how we want it. We'll have to pick, like each week, what are we doing with the table groups? And if you guys think that this is good and the class thinks so too, then of course we will do that.
Like more in the big group, like a big group and then in a table group. It seems like it'd be a big discussion for everybody to hear the same thing versus individual and then discussing individually. In groups.
Absolutely. Yep. If that's a
Yeah.
format that works, we'll go with whatever format that we all collectively think works.
Okay.
Okay.
Fascinating stuff. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, guys. You know you got 7 minutes to the next class, so give our regards to Jim and the team. And then,
Quick question. Did
Yeah,
you
go
guys
ahead.
see the Post?
Which post?
which post?
It's called The Post. It's with Meryl Streep. It came out in 2017. 2017, but it's about Meryl Streep plays Katharine Graham with the Washington Post. It's a true story.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just a very interesting because as watching it, and I watched it like a year ago or so, but just the amount of time and energy that went into making sure it was true. And if it wasn't true, they could lose the whole business. I mean, and they just showed that. And so when you say that about the network propaganda and how things have changed
Yeah,
over the
because
time,
the story goes back 40 years ago, right? So it's the 70s, I think. She was
Yeah.
the chief editor of the Post.
it's really good because her husband dies.
First woman to run the newspaper, sort of thing. So yeah.
1971.
Right, because they broke it with Watergate and with Bob, and what were the two guys' names? I forget.
Woodward and
Bob Woodward.
yeah.
Yep, and
The
Burns.
infamous Pentagon Papers is where I think is what the movie's around. Yeah, it was really good. I mean, it was
Alive back then. That's amazing.
that we don't do that anymore, but wish we would.
Well, you know, what's interesting is when we were working with CNN and Gary Tuchman on, you know, this is back in the impeachment situation, you know, do you remember? Yeah, that was like 9 months ago. And we were, so Gary Tuchman from CNN was commenting to us that, you know, he just doesn't understand why CNN is viewed as, could even be construed as fake news, because if he said that if I were to do anything false, you know, I would totally just lose my job. Like, but it's really interesting because I think it's gotten so muddled, you know. CNN doesn't realize, like, a lack of self-awareness of
Yeah.
how they have not done a good job of separating opinion versus news.
No, they actually have.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think that the perception is not there.
Well, the perception is from
the right is right there. I think
So,
I get what you're saying.
look at the chart.
right.
They personally believe that they are reporting the truth,
Yes,
but they're not aware that their opinions are coming through and kind of directing the truth.
right. It's
So
There's a lot
CNN
of
definitely
people-
has left bias, and that
Yeah. And then Fox is the same on the other side. Yeah.
yes, yeah. Just lack
Fox
of
though,
awareness.
Fox though and MSNBC are more extreme than CNN though. If you look at the chart on media bias chart, this last
Fox and what?
Fox and MSNBC are the
MSNBC. Yeah. Okay.
the two largest ones. Just real quick, this will be our last share here. So if you just look at where, let's look at where Fox is.
Oh yeah, I see CNN.
Right. So Fox Cable falls here. So you can,
Mhm.
this is probably the Sean Hannity shows, and then like the Chris Wallace stuff is much more respectable here. Fox News online is a bit better, a little bit more reliable, not as sensationalist as Hannity. They actually have a fair amount here.
Oh, they do. They separate it out. That's good.
Yep, because the cable shows are a little bit. So here's cable. So CNN is over here, so not quite as low as Fox. And then let's see, where is MSNBC here? MSNBC. So MSNBC is also worse than CNN. It's more left and it's lower reliability. And Fox was a little bit worse over here. But MSNBC and Fox are kind of the bucketing ends on the main, the most watched shows. Okay.
Yeah. And thank you.
So with that, we'll leave it there. Let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you that we had a rich discussion with Kevin and Dawn. Thank you for technology that we're able to get working and just our commitment to the truth. Please continue to guide us in all truth. We'll take you at your word. And may each of us have a wonderful and blessed weekend. And may we bring salt and light to all who come across our path. In your name we pray. Amen.
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 Rich, if we're going to continue to meet during the summer, just so you know, this is the last week for Tough Questions until September.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if we're going to alternate. I mean, I guess it wouldn't matter which hour we go to, but just so you know that that is open.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. I would prefer the later hour, but we'll see what everybody else wants. We'll be flexible.
Okay.
All
Because
right, guys.
All right.
See ya.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.